begins not with a goal, not with a trophy lift, not even with applause. It begins with silence, a vast stadium, 100,000 hearts holding breath. A man in white walks past the World Cup trophy without glancing at it. His head is bowed, his hands calm, and behind him the world is on fire. Zinedine Zidane has just been sent off, the last act of his playing career, a headbutt that stunned the globe, a red card in the final minutes of the biggest match on earth. And yet, no boos, no rage, just silence. As if even football itself understood. Something more than sport had just taken place. But this is not the end of the story. This is where we begin. Because to understand Zidane, you have to rewind. You have to go back, not to Madrid, not to Turin, but to the rough, dusty blocks of La Castellane, Marseille. A place where beauty was rare and silence could mean strength or danger. Where a boy named Zizou, the youngest of 5, learned to dribble not for fun, but to disappear. He didn't speak much, but his feet told stories. He was a boy with the blood of Algeria and the soul of France, juggling the weight of 2 worlds on the narrow streets of a forgotten neighborhood. His father swept floors, his mother never raised her voice, and Zidane? He watched. He listened. He learned that dignity wasn't something you showed. It was something you protected, quietly. Football wasn't his dream. It was his escape, and yet something happened every time he touched the ball. The world, so loud, so heavy, would fall away. In its place, rhythm, light, space. As if he was painting while others fought. As if the ball was not an object, but a language. And Zidane? He spoke it fluently. People saw a prodigy. But behind that gaze, calm, distant, was a storm. A mind always ticking. A heart carrying memories of streets that had no mercy. He would rise. Yes. But he would rise with the weight of where he came from. With pride. With fire. With silence. This is not the story of a football player. This is the story of a man who never raised his voice, yet made the whole world listen. Before he was Zizou, before the world bowed to the elegance of his touch, he was just Yazid. A boy with wide eyes and silent steps, growing up in a place where silence wasn't golden. It was necessary. La Castellane. The name sounds poetic in French, but it's not. It's a housing project in the north of Marseille, boxy, gray, and unforgiving. The kind of place where the sun sets early behind concrete, and dreams are smaller than the windows they peek through. His family lived on the 6th floor. His father, Smail, was a watchman by day and janitor by night. His mother, Malika, ran the household like a general, but with tenderness in her silence. They had come from Algeria with nothing, no status, no inheritance, just a belief that maybe, in France, their children could become something more. But for little Yazid, France didn't greet him with open arms. He was different. Brown-skinned in a pale world, Muslim in a Catholic classroom, Arabic in a French tongue. Children pointed. Teachers overlooked. The world didn't hate him, it just didn't see him. And so he found a place that did. A patch of pavement behind the building, surrounded by rusted fences and shouting kids. It was chaos. But in the middle of it, there was a ball. And for the first time, something responded to him. Something followed his lead. He touched the ball and the noise faded. At first, he just watched the older boys, the way they dribbled like they were dodging life itself, the way their bodies twisted to avoid kicks, insults, and failure. Football wasn't a sport, it was survival. And Zizou watched, memorized, and quietly joined. He wasn't the fastest, not the strongest, but he moved like music. Soon, the older boys passed to him, then waited for him, then followed him. At home, he said little. His father's rules were strict. His mother's eyes watched everything. But when he played, he was allowed to be loud without speaking, to take space without apology. There was one small flickering television in the living room. It showed glimpses of Platini, Tigana and Gires, idols of a world that felt impossibly distant. But Zidane didn't idolize them. He studied them. Not for the fame, for the timing, the balance, the intelligence. Even then, he wasn't interested in noise, only in mastery. His first real break came from a scout who noticed him playing barefoot with older kids. No uniform, no gear, just raw, liquid grace. The scout asked where he trained. Zidane didn't understand the question. He had never trained. He had danced. He had endured. Eventually, he joined U.S. Saint-Henri, then Septems-les-Vallons. It was still local, still small, but his name started spreading. Not because he scored 100 goals. He didn't. But because even then, he made people stop and stare. His passes whispered things. His body moved like it knew secrets. At age 14, he was offered a spot at the Cannes Youth Academy. It meant leaving home, leaving the safety of his mother's silence and the familiarity of the Marseille blocks. But Malika packed his bag with folded prayers, and Smail said only one sentence before putting his hand on Zizou's shoulder. Let them hear you without you needing to speak. And so he left. He didn't cry. He didn't wave. He just walked into a new world with the same quiet dignity that would one day define him. But Cannes wasn't a dream. It was colder, meaner. Coaches yelled, players mocked his accent, teammates stole his food, and still he said nothing. He responded with touches, with turns, with the kind of control that made noise irrelevant. One day during training, a defender, 2 years older than him, shoved Zidane to the ground and spat on him. The other players laughed. Zidane got up, brushed himself off, and kept playing. He didn't retaliate. He didn't report. He just took the next pass, feinted left, spun right, and left that same defender chasing shadows. The coach said nothing, but later pulled Zidane aside and whispered. That was louder than shouting. And that became his truth. He would go on to become a professional, to join Bordeaux, to play under stadium lights. But none of that would erase where he came from. His gaze would always carry La Castellane. His silence would always echo the voice of his father. His grace? That was his mother's legacy. Zidane wasn't born great. He was forged by silence, by struggle, and by a ball that finally spoke back. By the time Zidane reached Bordeaux, something had shifted. He was no longer a boy trying to survive. He was a man who knew exactly what he brought to the field. Not just skill, but silence wrapped in steel. In a sport defined by roar, of the crowd, of the coach, of the ego, Zidane played like a whisper, and somehow, the world heard him louder than anyone else. He didn't sprint. He glided. While others wrestled for space, he let the game come to him. A flick of the heel, a subtle turn of the hip, and 2 defenders vanished into irrelevance. Wasn't flashy. He was inevitable. Commentators didn't know how to describe him. Was he a magician? A philosopher? A ghost? But one thing was certain. Zidane made the beautiful game. Beautiful again. At Juventus, his legend began to bloom. The black and white stripes suited him. Classic, sharp, serious. He played alongside gladiators, men who roared and collided and chased glory with clenched fists. But Zidane? He played, like he already knew how the story would end. He studied angles like an architect, opponents like a chess master. In a midfield war zone, he made time slow down. And yet, for all the art he brought, there was always that flicker beneath the surface. A storm barely held at bay. The headbutt in '98 against Saudi Arabia. The flash of fury against Hamburg. It wasn't recklessness. It was pressure. A silent man carrying the noise of 1,000 expectations. But nothing, not anger, not fear, would stop the moment that changed everything. The summer of 1998. France, the World Cup. Les Bleus had never won it. The nation was divided by politics, by identity, by memory. And into that chaos stepped Zidane, son of Algerian immigrants, speaking not with speeches but with his feet. Through the group stage, he was solid. Not dazzling, but steady. Then came the knockout rounds, and with them the weight of a nation on his shoulders. And finally, the final. July 12, 1998. France versus Brazil. Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Roberto Carlos. A Brazilian machine facing a French side, built on hope, discipline, and one quiet genius. In the first half, 2 corners, 2 headers, 2 goals from Zidane. Not goals of grace, but of grit, of timing, of hunger. He didn't glide, he rose. Twice. As the third goal sealed France's 3-0 victory, the stadium erupted. Grown men wept, strangers embraced. For the first time, France had conquered the football world. But more than that, they had crowned a new kind of hero. Zidane wasn't blonde or blue-eyed. He wasn't loud or theatrical. He didn't fit the mold. And yet in that moment he became the soul of a nation. He stood on the podium, gold medal around his neck, not smiling wide, but quietly, humbly, as if he knew this wasn't just a football match. It was a shift in identity, in belonging, in history. 2 years later, Euro 2000. France came in not as underdogs, but kings. And Zidane? He was untouchable. From the group stage to the final, he controlled every minute like a conductor in a symphony. Free kicks, bent with poetry, dribbles that seemed to glide over air. Opponents chased shadows. His pass against Portugal in the semi-final, a laser-guided assist, left defenders frozen in place. When France lifted the Euro trophy, back-to-back with their World Cup, the message was clear. This wasn't luck. This was an era. And Zidane was its architect. But even in glory, he remained distant. He never danced like Ronaldinho, never shouted like Keane, never thumped his chest like Totti. He didn't sell sneakers with slogans. He sold silence, with substance. Teammates adored him, not because he demanded respect, but because he inspired it. He looked you in the eye and made you feel 10 feet taller. He didn't scream, he nodded. And somehow, that meant more. He became a symbol of elegance under fire, of control amidst chaos. But of course, this story isn't all triumph. There were missed penalties, harsh tackles, critics who called him cold. He never played for the crowd. He played for the moment. For perfection. And that made him unpredictable, mysterious, human. But even then, especially then, he remained magnetic. Zidane wasn't just a great player. He was a reminder that football can be more than passion. It can be poetry. It was his last match, but no one knew that yet. July 9th, 2006, the FIFA World Cup final. Zidane at 34 was not supposed to still be here, not supposed to dominate. His legs were older, his pace slower, but none of that mattered. Because Zidane wasn't here to run, he was here to remind the world who he was. The stadium in Berlin trembled with history. Italy versus France, a rivalry soaked in heritage and heartache. And standing in the middle, beneath the floodlights, was a man who had already won it all, yet looked like he still had something left to say. In the 7th minute, France earned a penalty. Zidane stepped up. The keeper was Gianluigi Buffon, tall, sharp, legendary. He guessed right, but Zidane didn't care. He chipped it. A Panenka. A move of arrogance? No, a move of supreme calm. The ball rose like a question, kissed the underside of the bar, and dropped across the line. 0, France. Zidane turned away emotionless, not celebrating, just returning to war. Italy would equalize through Materazzi. The match would grind into extra time, tight, tense, unbearable. But Zidane wasn't done. He rose again, this time for a header that should have won the match. Buffon saved it. A miracle. And then in the 110th minute, the moment that changed everything. No camera caught the words, only the aftermath. Zidane turned. He looked at Marco Materazzi, tall, smirking, needling. and he snapped. He lowered his head and drove it into Materazzi's chest. The Italian collapsed. The referee consulted his assistant. A red card was shown. And Zinedine Zidane, the hero of France, the son of La Castellane, walked away from his final game in disgrace. The world exploded. Commentators gasped. Fans screamed. Cameras zoomed. What had he done? But Zidane never explained. Not then. He didn't argue, didn't point, didn't cry. He just walked, past the referee, past his teammates, past the trophy. He walked alone, head high, into the tunnel, into legend. It was madness. It was beauty. It was betrayal. It was pain. But above all, it was human. In the hours that followed, the world demanded answers. What could Materazzi possibly have said? Days later, it leaked. Insults, vulgarities, words, aimed not at Zidane but at his sister, his mother, his dignity. And suddenly, the picture changed. Zidane wasn't just a man who lost control. He was a man who broke, but only when something sacred was touched. People argued. Should he have walked away? Turned the other cheek? Played on, but others, millions, understood. Not because they approved, but because they knew. Sometimes silence isn't strength. Sometimes silence breaks. And Zidane? He had been silent his whole life. He had endured racism, mockery, pressure. He had been the quiet savior, the elegant general, the mute maestro. But that day in Berlin, his silence cracked. And from that crack, we saw the truth. That greatness is not perfection. It is control held just long enough. And sometimes, losing. That control is what makes a man unforgettable. France would lose the final on penalties. Zidane would never play again. But no one remembers the penalty takers. They remember him, walking into the tunnel, his back straight, his legacy trailing behind like a shadow. Years later, when asked if he regretted it, Zidane didn't flinch. No, he said softly. I'd rather die than let someone insult my mother. Simple, final, not poetic, not polished, just honest, just Zidane. And that's the paradox that defined him. The elegance and the edge, the grace and the rage. He was a ballerina in boots, a soldier in silk. He wasn't trying to be perfect, he was trying to be true. And in that final act, raw, painful, misunderstood, he gave the world the most human ending of all, a goodbye, not wrapped in gold, but in gray, messy, flawed, real, like all of us. When he retired, Zidane disappeared. No farewell tour, no autobiography, no farewell tears. Just silence. Again. He turned away from the spotlight and returned to what he'd always known. Family, simplicity, and distance from noise. The world speculated. Would he coach? Would he fade away? Did he even want to come back? For years he said nothing, but Real Madrid was always watching. Because some talents can't be left dormant. Some minds don't just play the game, they see through it. So quietly they brought him back. Not to lead, to observe, to learn. First he worked as an advisor, then with youth squads. He sat beside Mourinho, then Ancelotti. He didn't interrupt. He took notes. Every day he absorbed, not just tactics but psychology. When he finally took over Real Madrid's first team in 2016, many doubted. He didn't look the part. He didn't command rooms like Klopp. He didn't burn with fire like Conte. He wasn't charismatic like Guardiola. But the players already knew. This was Zizou, and Zizou didn't need to raise his voice. He walked into the locker room like a man entering his own memory. Because he had been there, on that field, in that jersey, feeling that pressure. He wasn't a coach. He was a mirror, and they followed him, not because he threatened, but because he remembered. His first season ended with a Champions League title. Then the second, then the third, 3 consecutive Champions League trophies. No coach had done that in the modern era. Not Ferguson, not Guardiola, not Mourinho, just Zidane. But ask him what the secret was, and he'd shrug. Smile, maybe. Trust, he would say. Trust in the players. In preparation. In presence. While other managers drew detailed diagrams on tablets, Zidane walked through the pitch, looked each player in the eye, and said almost nothing. Just a hand on the shoulder. A nod. He believed that football wasn't won with systems alone, but with belief. And his players believed. Cristiano Ronaldo, Toni Kroos, Modric, Ramos, they all said the same thing. Zidane didn't complicate. He clarified. He reminded them of their greatness without saying it. There was a moment in 2018 before the Champions League final against Liverpool. The team was tense, the pressure unbearable. And Zidane? He said only one sentence. Remember who you are. That was enough. Madrid won. Again. But Zidane never celebrated like others. He never screamed on the touchline, he never threw his fists, he barely even smiled. Because for him, winning wasn't noise. It was balance restored. He stepped down not once, but twice. Each time, not with scandal, but with stillness. The press asked why. The fans begged for answers, but Zidane simply said, sometimes when it's time to go, you just know. No drama, no conflict, just timing. That's how he lived. That's how he led. His players never spoke about tactics. They spoke about energy, about calm, about a presence that made you believe nothing could go wrong, even when everything did. And perhaps that was his greatest gift as a manager. Not that he was the most tactical, not that he reinvented football, but that in a world drowning in noise, he created silence. And in that silence, his players heard themselves. Again, Zidane was not the kind of leader who barked instructions. He led with less, and from that less came everything. One day he was there, and then he wasn't. No press conference, no tribute match, no long goodbye. Zidane stepped away from football the same way he moved through it, quietly, with dignity, and without asking for applause. He vanished. Not into scandal. Not into business empires or political dreams. He went home. To his family. To his 4 sons. To gardens and books and early morning coffees. To the sound of silence he'd always trusted more than fame. People asked, will he return? They still ask. They wonder if he's waiting for the right call, the right project, the right challenge, but those who know him, they don't wonder, because Zidane never chases moments. He chooses them. He doesn't speak to be heard. He speaks when it matters, and maybe that's why he lingers in the air, even when he's gone. Maybe that's why stadiums still whisper his name when the lights go down. Why every young midfielder trying to play with grace has a bit of Zizou in their touch. Because Zidane wasn't just a footballer or a coach. He was a presence. A man who taught us that greatness doesn't always need a roar. Sometimes all it needs is control, timing, stillness. And now? Now he waits in the background, like a conductor with no stage, like a storm that has already passed but left the air different. He may return, or he may not. But either way, he doesn't need to, because some stories don't fade, they echo.